one mind and one world for us all, people. I am back with another dictation, audio dictation of the Epstein files, the recently released files and documents that are pertinent to Ghislaine Maxwell's case. We are continuing with chapter 10, and we left off on the end of chapter 9, which was quite an action-packed chapter, to say the least. Very juicy, very juicy. I think that's probably the best way to put it. Very dramatic, a lot of stuff going on there. So just going to continue with chapter 10, and we'll just dive right into it. I was fixed up more than what I had usually made. For anyone jumping in the middle here, for those that don't know, before I start, this is Virginia Joffrey's prose narrative writing, basically writing about her account of being trafficked, first by a man named Ron, then Charlie, and then Epstein. So at this point in the story, she's already met Epstein and Glenn, and she just got in a fight with her live-in boyfriend, TJ. So we are going to continue off, and actually, tail end, she had done her massage services to this professor from Harvard named Stephen. So, chapter 10. I was fixed up more than what I had usually made for 2 days, which was great because that car I had been saving for was finally within my reach. I had been waiting for the freedom a car gives every teenager for a long time, and now that I had over $15,000 saved up, I could pretty much afford to go buy myself a nice car outright. Looking much better than the last time I saw him, Jeffrey acknowledged it. I went to his office where he was waiting for me, and he had a guest with him. She was unusual looking to the common stereotype drop-dead gorgeous girls Jeffrey had normally introduced me to. Of Asian descent, her name was Rena. Jeffrey had met her at an art gallery where some of her own artwork was on display. She had a bubbly persona about her, and I could then understand why Jeffrey liked her so much. She fit into the subservient category that he liked girls to fall under. It was apparent to me that they had already slept together in the short time span they had met, as their closeness was oddly noticeable, and I wondered what it was he was offering to her in exchange for her body. I found out later from Jeffrey that he was buying her artwork, promising her the world as an artist, telling her he'd have her work in all museums in New York City and the best art exhibits. Everyone was promised something and seemed to be bought off in some way or another to be in his company. It was only a matter of time that the truth would come out. To my own amazement, Rena was to be assisting me in Jeffrey's massage this day, not being a total knockout or anything spectacular. Looks wise, that is, but for some reason he seemed intrigued enough. As we made our way through his spectacular mansion, she was in total awe at every corner. Commenting on the present artwork and decor that we passed in every hall, it no longer seemed so grandeur to me anymore, but hearing someone else speak about it in such excitement reminded me of the days when all this seemed so unforeseen. When we got to the massage room, or the dungeon, as I used to put it, for its medieval-looking appearance, we firstly, out of custom, all had a steam shower, where Jeffrey expected me to walk her through a servant's duties, telling her to take his other foot and start rubbing in small circles and stroking the arches of his foot rhythmically. Rena took the instructions well and began to massage him too. When we all went to the shower next, and she followed in my exact lead, washing his body as well. Jeffrey absolutely loved the fact that 2 teenage girls were duly pampering him. Jeffrey wanted to move to the massage bed, and I had to further begin to show her about the body, upon his accord. She mimicked my every mood up until his legs and buttocks, keeping up with every stroke until he could not contain his arousal any longer, and he was already requesting us to start kissing each other. He started the very reason we had even met in the first place. He blatantly stopped the massage nowhere near being complete and turned over to announce his increased arousal in a physical abundance of grotesqueness. Moving over to the small couch in the corner of the room, he made a space for her to lie me down on the massage table as she had commanded him to do in such a domineering tone that he wasn't used to being spoken down to with. From that very moment onwards, and from the look on his face, he was yearning for her to orchestrate an hour of deliverance upon my meek nature. He started to stroke his erect manhood, and he was being tantalized watching her take over every inch of my body in a dominating art of seduction. I was left breathless and sore after my first introduction into the world of S&M, or sadomasochism. Reina considered herself a dominatrix. She loved bondage, whipping, hitting, and eventually cutting her sex partner with little sharp knives until they subdued to her punishment in agonizing pain. She was absolutely crazy, if you were to ask me, and I couldn't help but wonder what got her into this in the first place. All I knew was that Jeffrey was absurdly taking into the appeal of watching us two interact, often with her acting as my mistress, who would fondle me with an insurmountable amount of whips and toys. Then she would love to finish off every session by hitting me across my face with a hard blow from the back of her hand and sneering over my curled up body, showing Jeffrey her ability to make others surrender to her extreme force. She could be so opposite all of a sudden and be tenderly intimate with Jeffrey, stroking his penis lovingly and even speaking in baby talk to him, which he seemed to adore. He loved us pairing up so much that within months he made Rena an official, even renting her an apartment at the same place he had one for me during my extensive trips out to New York City, sending us out shopping together to all of the underground seedy sex stores downtown. We would bring him back thousands of dollars worth of sexy outfits, sex toys, and bondage material. His favorite one was a black leather studded collar that led down the back of my spine to cuff my hands and feet together, offering Rena the most compromising positions. This is ridiculously weird. To wield her afflictions, one she was excited to pick out for my usage. She was good at eradicating my softer side, though, helping me forward an unpredictable scenario of me turning the tables on her, making her at my will instead of me always being at her twisted discretion. Jeffrey loved the rivalry between us, both striving to dominate the other one, but to me it was just another way of surviving her punishment. All for show, I thought. She was a madman let loose in a torturesome domain of violent sex and unbearable beatings. I wasn't sure how long I could hold off this charade of S&M. I just didn't want Jeffrey to think I couldn't give him everything that she could, always being replaceable in his company. She and I could often come across as good friends to his blind eye. Oh my gosh. But it was only a matter of time before the animosity inside of me was going to snap. Doing normal things too made it all half bearable. Having a lot of similar interests, we did fun things like go to the theater to watch Phantom of the Opera or visit several historical and art museums together, afterwards treating ourselves for a giant piece of greasy New York City pizza. Like I said, we really liked each other purely as friends, but the dominance in the massage chambers was taking its toll. I just lost my spot. What's up, Lufa? Give me a second here, people. But it was taking its toll on our strained friendship. On one average trip back to New York City, she surprised Jeffrey with a 6-foot by 6-foot oil painting of her and I lying nude in a yin and yang position facing each other. Although we were soliciting each other with sexual innuendo, the picture was still very carefully orchestrated to perfectly portray the darker side of Jeffrey's thrills. It was an amazing piece of work. Besides the lewdness of it, but she would have known that's exactly what kind of art Jeffrey liked. He was so astounded by her gift, as he had previously asked her to construct a small painting of us together, but was not expecting anything of this grand magnitude she had presented him with. He lifted her from the ground and twirled her around before he thanked her profusely and embellished her with his profound gratitude. The only thing Jeffrey had to offer, he handed her a small wad of cash as her payment. It was the most appreciation I had ever seen him show a girl. Obviously moved by her gesture, he got her an exhibit in New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art. Wow, this guy had pull. Where she submitted... Oh my goodness, I just lost my... I don't know what happened there. Where she submitted... Something happened here, people. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. I don't know what happened. Exhibit in New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she submitted her very own piece. She sculpted an image of my headshot out of clay, shaping it with these strands of my long hair blowing across my face. I was taken aback myself at her creation. She really did have an amazing talent. If not for her meaner streak, she would have been a great friend. I will never forget, Rena, all the ups and downs we endured together. It's fascinating. The most appreciation he showed a girl was an Asian girl, not a white girl. It wasn't too much longer before I finally had enough of the abuse in the bedroom, and I had to tell Jeffrey what I was feeling. She was getting even more violent as time went on, and with her questioning me and Jeffrey why she didn't get brought on long trips with him, she didn't get the fact that she was just a tool for him to use. Jeffrey said he was already thinking about getting rid of her off of his regular list. He said she was becoming too clingy, and he didn't like clinginess or jealousy. I never even got to say goodbye or take the opportunity to keep her as a friend, like a girlfriend to catch up with once in a while. But that's how it was with Jeffrey. One day you sat under the blanket of his comfortably, and I think it's supposed to say comforter. And the next, without any warning, you could be discarded like yesterday's news. She would have taken it hard, but that's the game we were playing, and it was for those who knew what lines not to cross. I was further surprised the next day when Jeffrey gave me $1,000 to go shopping in downtown Manhattan to find a classy dress, on top of being sent to the exclusive beauty salon of celebrity stylist Frederick Fekkai for a new look. It was amazing to be pampered like royalty. I walked out of there feeling like I had replaced a young girl with a young woman. I felt beautiful. He had yet another surprise in store for me. Ghislaine called me and told me I needed to go to a photo developing store and ask them for 2 ID photos that bring them downtown to Jeffrey's Manhattan office. Weird request, I thought. I was more used to posing in full body shots being sexually exposed as a gift for Jeffrey. I did as they asked and took my 2 photos into the office where Jeffrey's assistant was waiting for my arrival. Still not telling me what the headshots were for, she took them from me and told me to have a seat for a second. A moment later, I heard Jeffrey call me into the office. I like what you've done with your hair. You've gone more blonde. Suits your glowing tan. I replied with an appreciative thank you for sending me to such a renowned hairstylist and shopping money. I showed him my finds for the day. An elegant off-the-shoulder navy blue dress that had 2 layers that would swoosh and sway with every stride. I couldn't wait to wear it on a special occasion, and I wouldn't have to. The pictures I had to bring him, as he would proceed to tell me, were for my first passport. I was so excited. We were going to France for a super close friend of Jeffrey and Ghislaine's birthday party, famed supermodel Naomi Campbell. I was so overjoyed with excitement. What girl my age with a background like mine was attending socialite parties and globetrotting the world? It only made it hard for me to see beyond the elusive walls I put up to protect myself from the appalling truth. We left in early April, first going to London, Paris, and then our final destination being Saint-Tropez in southern France. Roll up and smoke my sins away. I'd like to go to Saint-Tropez. Okay, I'm done. If Hallmark had a postcard, Saint-Tropez would definitely be on the front of it. It was beautiful spring weather, and everywhere you looked, women were dressed in bikini tops branded with some kind of designer label embedded into it, and the men were following them around like harping dogs in heat. In all of the elegance of the Mediterranean, La Bastide de Saint-Tropez was an impressive landmark. Please excuse the pronunciation if I butchered that. Jeffrey and Ghislaine were staying in one of the private cottages on the park on the grounds, while Emmy and I stayed in separate quarters inside the hotel. The old-style cobblestone streets were lined with boutique shops and beauty parlors. It was the hedonistic stomping grounds of the beyond rich and famous. The next day, we went out to lunch at the grand opening of the infamous Nikki Beach Club, where a cheap glass of champagne costs around $200. And if you're not keeping the alcohol consumption flowing like water, you'd be asked to leave to make way for the constant flow of prospectus patrons. That's where I first got to meet Naomi Campbell. She was wearing the typical attire, starting around southern France, a D&G bikini top and wraparound miniskirt to go over the swimsuit's bikini. She was so tall and stunningly beautiful. Her charisma was energetic, funny, and everyone seemed to hang off of her every word and laugh at her every joke. Ghislaine and Jeffrey kissed her cheeks and wished her a happy birthday. And then I was introduced and followed in their suite. She was surrounded by a league of assistants, friends, and fans, which didn't make it easy for all of us to converse, but she got enough time in to invite us to aboard a yacht of a fellow she was kind of seeing at the time for the before party ahead of tonight's event. We went back to the hotel, and I gave Jeffrey a massage in his room before we all headed down to the pool to soak in some of the year's first sun's rays. I loved wearing my new ball gown and feeling like a princess. It was absolutely sensational. It made me feel as if I floated in the dress. I swept up my long hair in a twisted clip, only letting down a few curly strands, and layered on the mascara. Receiving many compliments throughout the evening, even when we eventually left the yacht to make our appearance at the main birthday bash, I couldn't help but feel excitement for the party to come. It was the first celebrity birthday bash I had ever been to. Being introduced to model after model, and the rich men that followed them around became dizzying. Jeffrey sat back and watched as I buoyantly worked at the dance floor, coming back to the table where he was, only to grab another champagne glass every now and then. Every so often, he'd introduce me to someone new, pulling me aside to show off his eager young masseuse to his fellow pedos. These people had so much money pouring out of them. I don't know why he even thought they'd care in the first place. It made me feel good, though. At least I knew I made him proud to have me in his company. Being surrounded by so many of Jeffrey's colleagues and his like-minded people that were considered the most sophisticated and highly esteemed of today's world nearly made the way I was living lately more fathomable, at least to myself. I thought if everyone looks up to these people and they were all accepting of it, it must just be the way the world turns. I danced with a young prince that night, and with all of the help from the bubbly champagne, I couldn't remember his name for the life of me. Oh my goodness. On one of my trips back to the table for another glass, Jeffrey leaned over quietly to whisper in my ear that it was a prince that I had actually been dancing with, and it didn't faze me in the least way. I went back to the dance floor and continued to let my hair down. It was a fun bash. The entire crowd sang happy birthday to Naomi. By the time we got back to the car to retreat for the night, I was giddy from the drinking and dancing all evening. We had a guest in the car, and apparently we had already been introduced, but I couldn't even remember his name in the first 5 minutes of our meeting again. He was the hotel owner of some large chain in America called Hilton. Oh my gosh. Staying at one of the cottages near Jeffrey, he saw it quaint to loan me out for a night's massage to ruin an almost perfect evening. Jeffrey told me to come back to his room after I was finished with Rick. Thankfully, he reminded me of his name, but also all odd, I thought. Being so late, I would have never imagined Jeffrey could stay up this late, but I never made a fuss out of his requests. I gave him affirmation of my understood instructions and headed off with the stranger into the darkness. I dimmed the bright lights in his bedroom to a softer tone, as if it might aid the vision of this short, balding man with straggling remnants of curly brown hair left to show for the remaining bits of youth left in him. I had to ask him to undress and lay on top of the towel that I had picked up from the neatly folded pile at the end of his bed and spread it over the duvet. I didn't want to waste a second in his place, getting right to the very reason I was even there. Turning around while he was getting undressed, being our first time together, I wanted to give him the impression I was actually a therapist and not a finale to the end of the night's entertainment. Not exactly what he had in mind, though, given that my impression was already made for me when Jeffrey arranged for our meeting in the first place. His chuckle to my response was condescending as he came up behind me and unzipped my dress, which floated to the bottom of the floor. He was saying, "You can't really expect to give a massage wearing this. Here, sweetie, I'll help you out of it." Just wanted to see the hidden bounty my clothes were hindering his eyes from seeing. I just went about my way, trying to get his hands off of me and to get him to lie down for a massage. Making quaint conversation with him was pointless, as I was trying to send his thoughts elsewhere other than the apparent perverted schemes replaying in his mind from the heavy breathing he was making and the looks he was giving me. I was using all of the tricks in the turn-off book, even asking him about his wife and kids. Unquestionably, he was in seventh heaven, turning every one of my distractions into another flattering compliment. He was saying things like, I love what you do you to me. I have never felt like this before. Come stay with me and I will pay you double. No, triple whatever Jeffrey pays you." Knowing he was just a drunk idiot, I wasn't being lured in by any of his offers of money or a privileged lifestyle. I knew these cages all too well, and I was better off sticking with one that I was at least accustomed to already. Holding back any composure now, He was going extremely wild, ravishing at my body, trying to tear off my panties like a hungered wild animal. You would think it's this guy's first time. After all the champagne I had drunk that night, it gave me the nerve that I needed to know exactly how to handle perverts like this one, who had been no different from every other schmuck in my life. And I quickly shut him up with a blowjob, lasting no longer than 2 terrible minutes. It had only been, oh my goodness, it had only been a half an hour before I was already getting quickly dressed and hurrying out his cottage door. When I got to Jeffrey's cottage, I rushed through the door and told Jeffrey and Ghislaine, who were sitting in front of the fireplace reading books, that I never wanted to see that guy ever again. When they asked me what was the matter, I told them of everything that had happened the night before, even how he offered to come work for him, getting paid triple. I established a lot of trust with Jeffrey that night. He asked me why I didn't accept the offer. And I responded with, "Who would look after you if I were gone?" Like a caring grandfather would do, he pulled me to his chest for a hug and told me that it meant a lot to him. It was so late and I was so tired, but I still had to give Jeffrey his massage that night. Dang, this girl's putting in work. This is ridiculous. He asked me to just rub his feet as he fell asleep, and thankfully he was out like a light in no time. The next morning, I took 2 headache tablets and a ginger ale instead of coffee. Trying to contain my hangover as best as possible behind a pair of sunnies, it was mid-afternoon by the time I felt like myself again. We spent the day yacht hopping, soaking in the sunny weather, while Jeffrey and Ghislaine caught up with old acquaintances. Emmy and I were just accessories to look good on the arms of them. The next day, we wrapped up the tail end of our trip and commenced our flight back into the U.S. I was paid a generous amount and set off to go car shopping as soon as I got back to Florida. Through a private seller, I was able to pay outright for my car. I got a Dodge Dakota in cherry red and immediately had an impressive sound system put in. That's what I'm talking about. She was my first pride and joy and taste of freedom. I would love to drive her down to Lake Worth Beach to sit in my car and watch the waves while I listened to my stereo blare music and puffed on a J, letting the rest of the world pass by while I sat back and watched them walk past, wondering to myself what their story was all about. I turned 17 that summer and had accumulated a string of exotic destinations that I traveled in such a short time. I was given more makeup and a pair of diamond earrings from Jeffrey. Ghislaine only wished me a happy day, wondering at times if she felt threatened by Jeffrey's and my closeness. We went to the island after we left New York City, and I asked if Sarah would be meeting us, mentioning it had been a while since we had last seen her. He said that he had some bad news about her. What? Oh my gosh. Something just happened. Bear with me, people. This document gets fussy with me sometimes. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, so she asked if Sarah would be meeting us, mentioning it had been a while since we had last seen her. He said he had some bad news about her. Expecting the worst, thinking that she had gotten hurt or something, I was astounded when Jeffrey told me she had been sent to his island with one of his friends for a couple of days. And when the housekeepers were cleaning her room and they found a stash of cocaine left out carelessly in the bathroom, he said he had no choice but to let her go. Addicts with no respect for themselves or his wishes had no leeway in Jeffrey's book. He didn't mind that I dabbled in drugs once in a while as long as I never brought them along with us on any trips, except for my Xanax, which he didn't mind because it was pharmaceutical, and most of all, wouldn't cause him trouble being a legal narcotic. Sarah took it too far when she crossed international borders with an illegal drug, risking her welfare and almost costing Jeffrey public attention. She lost her apartment and contacts in the acting world, only hearing from acquaintances once in a while that she was sinking deeper and deeper into the black hole of addiction. It was sad to find out, as I always did like her. At the island, Ghislaine had just recently obtained her helicopter pilot's license and wanted to get some practice airtime, and flew Jeffrey and I to St. John, where we picked up Alexandria Cousteau, the granddaughter to the inventor of the scuba tank and underwater explorer Jack Cousteau. Ghislaine was out to set us a fright in the air, but it was all talk. She was actually an impressive pilot. Still a daredevil, though, she got her kicks out of hearing us fret on the earmuffs intercoms. Jeffrey made it clear that Alexandra was a guest when I was told to adhere to her if she wanted a massage, which I obliged her with several times during our first meeting. It was Jeffrey who instigated that her and I reenact as lovers in lesbian acts of foreplay and penetration. I couldn't imagine a girl with such high prospects lowering herself to something of Jeffrey's standards. But I later found out through Jeffrey that he had donated money to her continuous exploration into marine life and habitats. She had followed in her family's footsteps, all of them involved in marine biology in some way or another. We actually got along really well. She was a real decent girl and loved talking about her passion, everything underneath the water surface. When I wasn't busy giving massages to everyone around, her and I would hang out together. Often we'd go swimming in the crystal clear pool of ocean that the Caribbean had to offer. Once we swam out so far, not paying attention to our location, and we were carried out to sea by the current. We took turns on the backs of each other, taking breaks against the strong ocean tide. It was almost a possibility that we nearly drowned out there, if it weren't for some guys on a boat out fishing for the day that when we caught us in their view. They picked us up and brought us back to the island, where we were reprimanded by a worried Jeffrey and Ghislaine to, first of all, let someone know where we are going at all times, and to never lose sight of the shore while out for a swim. After that learning experience, I took their heed and proceeded with caution. I had a newfound respect for the ocean and its mysteries. Having such a lover of the water as a guest made Jeffrey want to explore parts of his Caribbean he had never seen before. The next morning, we were met by a scuba instructor in St. James and given a few lessons in how to use the gear and more tips like how to descend slowly to the ocean floor as to not cause blood clots, as well as visual hand signals to communicate underwater. It was so exhilarating beneath the water surface. No voices to listen to, only the enchanting sights to take in. We explored the surrounding reef and found a large squid, many of sea urchins, and the magnificent colored coral that housed many of the rich variety in the local species of fish. It was such a great sight to take in, holding a permanent mental picture of those adventures to carry in my head for all times. We all had such a great time that Jeffrey hired the same scuba instructor to come out the next day to scuba dive the safer parts around his island. We got bored quickly with not much to see but seaweed and a fish here and there. It didn't take long before Ghislaine decided for us all to explore other numerous locations by boat. Jeffrey needed a bit of convincing at first, and the instructor was quick to assure him that he knew his way well around these waters. Of course, he would say that he was getting paid a hell of a lot to do this in the first place. Why not extend it a few more hours? Their water glistened, and the tropical array of marine life was on display as he wanted to stop at many places, but you could see as beautiful as it was could be as equally dangerous. It took so long as we had to veer away from so many desirable spots. Finally, we had a good place that the scuba instructor thought was safe. He buddied us up on into pairs, and we jumped off the back of the boat into the crystal aqua blue waters, beginning our descent slowly into the darker regions of the ocean's floor. We were situated on open water with a cavern of reefs to venture in and around down below. It seemed to be quite a choice to scuba in, one that our guide said he wasn't familiar with, but to alleviate his bored clientele, deemed safe to swim around. It was Jeffrey and the guide together, Ghislaine and Emmy, and I was paired up with Alexandria. Miles, the houseman, came with us and stayed on the boat just in case something went wrong, and lucky he did. We were all too far under the water to hear his alarming screams of distress when shadows lurking in the murky distance started appearing closer and closer. Ghislaine actually looked frightened for once as she gave us the signal to start ascending upwards, reminding us to holding our ears not to go up quick, as we were previously warned before we could pop a blood vessel in her brain and hemorrhage to death. Not a very lovely image, but neither was getting torn apart by sharks. Those giant shadows became clear, and soon enough we could recognize their indistinct species as the terrifying and more aggressive breed of sharks, the hammerhead. Grabbing Miles' hand, I was the last one ahead of the guide to get on the boat, imagining the worst as I waited behind Emmy and Alexandra, who were the next to follow after Jeffrey and Ghislaine. I was in too much shock to scream or cry. I just told myself I had to stay calm to get out of this alive. Unlucky for us, later we found that we were in their breeding territory and being sent a clear message that we were soon to be on the menu to their feeding frenzy. We all felt like we had cheated death, and I know it wasn't only my heart that was still beating out of my chest when we headed back to Jeffrey's island. Jeffrey was pale as his designer sheets and looked like he had aged another 10 years in such a scared state. Ghislaine took the heat off of herself, even barely taking a notice of beforehand, and decided to poke one of us all, frantically scurrying to get out of the water. It was just her nature, as I had never seen her move so quickly either. We got back to the island and all collapsed our fatigued bodies in our own beds for a long nap. Freshened up and much more relaxed, we regaled our horrendous story again over dinner, this time in laughter. The following afternoon, Ghislaine piloted us all in the helicopter to St. John's Airport, and we said goodbye to Alexandra, where we all parted ways. I met her a few more separate times in Palm Beach at Jeffrey's mansion, but she wasn't a regular of his. Probably not as easy as the Trouble Girls were to bribe. That was chapter 10. Wow. Man, she has lived such a crazy life. Virginia Roberts, my goodness. I've been scuba diving before. I've never seen a shark, but I can tell you, man, there's nothing I fear more in nature than the ocean. It is quite late here in the Midwest, people, so I'm going to call it for this session. That was chapter 10. When I awake in the morning, we will continue with chapter 11. I'm just going to look at the comments, see what everybody's up to. Donatelli Underwood, Alex Flager, like your cat. Yeah, it was, man, it's crazy. Definitely, seems like every chapter tops the one previous with just the craziness of the stories that Virginia has, experienced. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. This has been Virginia Roberts' prose narrative about her time with not only Epstein and Maxwell, but also her previous traffickers as well, which are in my previous parts of this dictation. If you guys did enjoy this, try to give me a sub if you so desire. And check me out on brand new tube as well. I'm a Rhodium account on there, which basically means they dub me as premium content and promote me a little bit more. So it's pretty cool. If you guys are so inclined to give a no problem, Alex, give a donation, I would love that as well. I don't get paid because I am demonetized. I just reapplied for monetization today, so we'll see how quickly that gets processed. But I also do Patreon. You can do it as little as $1, or you can make a one-time donation for more if you like. So that is it for this session. Cheers, all the best from the Midwest. Stay frosty, folks, and until next time.